All right, you're good, Gavin.
All right, ready?
Yeah.
Contention 1 is engagement. U.S. law concerning Latin America relegates the regional political irrelevance where hemispheric strategies permeated with our neglect towards the region that U.S. policymakers regard with ambivalence and disdain. We are denying that we are entering an era of like U.S. policymakers likely to be surrounded around the disdain relations we driven by domestic political relations in Latin America, stating Washington State Supreme Court as Latin America has always been low in our priorities when our roads are something the risk of something outside Latin America seems hopeless, not working to many in the foreign policy. We may see Latin America as a black hole without the quota where the U.S. will be less into Latin America, less inclined to assist in less interested in building the United States, not for example, Latin America states radically and U.S. internal Latin America less public big time with the railroad is democracy. Our markets coming up with its own axis now. No, the answer is no other viable to stop the Latin America solve its own problem in this form. But not neglect manifests itself to selective intervention. The United States picks and chooses when and how to engage Latin America. Doing so only with the self-serving conserve our own security and economic interests. Our scenario power will notify the U.S. not only invest in a significant resource effort to campaign to target assist and target new population problem of the beyond hegemony, fiscal conservatism, and one a general hegemonic attention, motivation, lack of interest, rise and percent for the burden that the region will generate. No one express U.S. nationalism unless the environment constitutionalization for the United States and all the political agenda. I've watched lessons when the rest of the future of the lawsuit from Latin America to a humanized workplace, boost wages, to create jobs around place, provides up free trade, along the equivalent to the rest of the nations, exporting and profit remittances, the amount of almost in the direction of domestic politics and away from the foreign, and even when the U.S. justice invade to do so and demand that disregards the interests of the people, Cuba, Mexico, Venezuela, and every other country in the region, U.S. neoliberal interventions may have secured our narrow strategic interests, but they result in ongoing violence against the people of Latin America. Heading away, the Latin America was the first place U.S. supposing the Olympic company uses power to left force Latin America to reach elections and properties to live marvelous to people of Latin America to pay for this inequality in Latin America is going to millions of people lost their jobs, long access to healthcare and education. U.S. elective engagement is based on the same violent ideology that drove European expedition of Latin America in the 19th century. Neoliberalism is simply a new phrase of mercantilist subjugation, gross to developmentism, chemical ideology, capitalist one economic not for these to probably related to down without a free trade, sovereignty, independent racial classes that did free trade, freedom, rights, and equality, one play the least, left into the colonial, my capital, points, corporate laborers, rich, hardest, least, maintain racial best goods, only the one least established for some opportunity back in the civility, get a person in Latin America's feudal and back to justify Latin America's subordinated new master from the U.S. New York, mercantilist, blue economic ideas, named by 19th century least, I'll say, between protectionist, free chippers, and they were committed to a nationalist capitalist of own through the formation of local industrial works, evolution, right, getting goals, justifying economic subordination, and very cheap political domination, scientific burgers, property, evolutionary state, the order, while using Latin America, just by defense for capitalism, and over economic liberalism, against backwards, beautiful economic, so with the radical economic liberalism, and focus against the United States, and it's not simply about political economics, rather its ideology is rooted in a racial and so existence that marginalizes those who definitely into our black-white dichotomy of race relations. Martinez 94, we picture and the report that happens in Saudi Arabia, when against the difference in Latin America, long-term U.S. institutions at G2, which Latin America finds a competence with absurdity. U.S. political culture braces self-centered itself as the one sitting economy, second nation sitting on an economy with 20 others speaking languages other than English, and the difference between the border rules, around one of the reasons was and just the white and black concept of race and one period of the new thinking about race, which is crucial. This makes extermination of the Latin American other and imperative landing to get political that Latin America has been historically characterized by a narrow perspective of European expanded colonialism because of the difference born by hegemonic levels of continuity, the North Central cultural and social conditions of society, about which the economic considering voice with the same structure of white masculine every rest is the other property of black community essentially converted the future made by the white and westerners or exterminated that majority, specifically the combination of racial stigmatization, economic nationalist ideology, guarantees unimaginably heinous violence, reckless of neoliberalism, percent hegemonic to monolith of Latin American neoliberalism, one multiple country the market of Latin America opposite neoliberalism, readily and opportunity market economy to restructure economic rights with that secure allowances, but which American which is Latin American delivers work by estimated equality pushing into people in poverty, large men of poverty, segregated labor markets, limited park institutional land, to be subscribed neoliberalism makes into the state. Next year, say by going earlier he says that the new Latin American political percentage spent at the next year, they live we challenge the ideology underpinning current engagement towards Latin American global slaughter becomes inevitable. Robert's no way there is no homogeneous Latin America to the global conflict. The goal seem to have tended to Christ to be done the pre-speech of an ecological holocaust in the mass exchange of space independent collapse of agriculture, mathematics, global warming, the contamination of the oceans through water and air, global exception to authoritarianism, war, sustained sentinel intellectuals, combat get to critical on these goals, strategy, rather than social sustainability, listed in which we need organic intellectuals, get rid of the resonance for the structures of emotions, social biology, critical lessons as we came up of inspiring massive reaction, development programs, integrate theory and practice, specific policies are not a valid defense of colonial system as well. You have natural obligation to reject the overarching system of colonial thought, shakes up. Even the most classic colonial project of goals of colonials that comes to be determined in the neighborhood rights, which remains violation of systemic eradication of ways of thinking, speaking, being the enabling not being that's justification for the alleged violation of violence of colonials operates into limits of violence between the colonizers and the colonized within the colonized properties is and directly persistent of the colonial entities to temporary political bunch of contention acts unidentical ways it makes sense to situate genocide within the logic of colonialism contention to its pedagogy. Our thoughts and ideas that inform our understanding of Latin American matter, problems, and what we think about Latin American academic debaters, critical challenges of the current ideology, change political thought about the region, purchase G13. The rising regional Latin American science, education, concepts, voice scholars focus on the debate, hips, and status policy on the debate, regional scholars focus on the U.S.-centric understanding of Latin American informed policy must be understanding of both sides of the politically expressed U.S.-Latin American relations, not with U.S. policy, things practical, policy of the U.S. foreign policy making process, only the chunky pictures, in fact, saying spread destruction, hegemonic accept the U.S. is the active Latin American country, the dependent and defense, options, structural knowledge, way of the public working and in such use the marginally modern world is inseparable from the colonial origins that gave birth to our foundational Western logic is soaked with colonial thought, which must be resisted and thought. Modernity and colonial work together, two sides of the same chain. Latin American modernity go hand in hand with the balance of colonial. America goes in hand with the representation of the rich and European institutions together for America's and under which modernity became the logic of coloniality for implementation. Latin America kind of further from European modernity, tell them apart the story. It's not just about the shift in geography or reasoning, understanding colonial forces, control, domination, exploitation, disguise, and modernization. Cannot be modern without being colonial. America cannot be separate from coloniality. And the structures of knowledge which engage the debaters and consequences on our land supremacy. Modernity, we as debaters must reach got to be colonial difference in order to pluralize knowledge and evaluate alternate perspectives. Outcome 7. Colonials are continuity of the establishment of organization, probably Europe's bank and human rights, colonies, and debate, distributors, and medina, influences, also taking up colonized perspective, replace exploitation, hegemony, Eurocentric knowledge, transmitted, operates place, marketing, relevant to the colonies, for the main sort of colonial forms of hegemony, Eurocentric, such as epistemological, political, liberating, reason as alternative, imperial reason, colonial legend, hegemony, issues of the Europe, smarter the results, synthetic to imperial knowledge, dependent categories of now, so they gave it a look at it, maybe we need the decolonial critical theory dealing from colonization, knowledge, why is it considered sufficient to have one Latin American University in the United States when you prescribe colonial differences, represents colonial differences, and prescribe something colonial differences, to split the logic of European colonial differences, to break up logic, same different ways of colonialism, creates back into the logic, the question was a meaningful, intelligible subject, colonial representation, color type of humor, new disparate, every alternative is not assume one, historical culture, no central from unified tradition, to vote after affirm economic engagement with Latin America through the lens of epistemic disobedience. This is the only effective and ethical affirmation of the resolution made on shop, and analytic Eurocentrism, when you need to regard epistemic decolonial opportunity, international, whatever the colonial part of the West is not in place, epistemic disobedience, colonial, this concept of virginity, never for what is the ideology of international blackness, has spread against the question the coloniality that has been erratic, modernity, generated attention to forgotten marks of the human beings, colonialism, only know what was possible to by modern rationalism, commanded closed by Greek, Latin, and the sixth modern imperial language. And then one is he's opening up space for counter history, subverts hegemonic knowledge as an act of colonial resistance, Medina, to get 11 official history of knowledge, critically maintain unity by opposing measure best and silence and alternative interpretation to counter the thoughts under to discourse, virtue the unprotected of people that use as weapon against the official legitimize their oppression after as a person part of this constitutional work experience to repeat secret knowledge, effective meeting and actions and robots counter the inflection for the disunity, blocking the function of the official history of the sum is not the history of the others, and the historical interrogation is critical current narratives. U.S. action continued the dominant historical narrative of colonial oppression, trumpeting go to give our histories of non-political struggle, the educating practice, very tangible effects of critical requires questioning a singular history that celebrates the U.S. as central like the West was greater welfare, specific representation of West normalized empirical practice of role the U.S. holds remains a question in the classroom research rather than question the outcome reflection rather than past nostalgia to discover the colonial sensibility, the past as a gibbet, the present day, understand the act of critical allegiance to the supporting authority, the city of the institute ideological ally, the church, the system, our bands, and our in the history of nation education, learning a set of foundation, the racism, equality, the plurality of identities, means that there's no pride, knowledge, one of the person experience, intermediate with this representation with the productive discussion and learning. You have an ethical obligation to educate and endorse our injection of Latin American critical theory in the way the opposite one that tries to go with knowledge and struggle with practice, system, critical theory, education, social representation, environmental partisanship, that required of practice, demonstration, the former city demands and practice, but never also expand opportunities for critical theory.
All right.
Marketing theory.
This obviously isn't a traditional debate. What is the judge's role of the ballot?
Ryan, you want to take it?
We don't provide a role in the ballot as of the 1AC.
No role of the ballot as of the 1AC, then what the hell is the judge voting for?
Our advocacy, I suppose the role of the ballot, if you really need one, is the advocacy statement, the Bangalore card.
So,
to affirm economic engagement.
The role of the ballot is affirm epistemic disobedience, am I correct?
That's our advocacy statement.
Economic engagement through the lens of epistemic.
Economic engagement through the lens
Ballot
of
says who did the better
epistemic.
debating.
Oh, what?
Ballot says who did the better debating.
So who did the better debating? And how does judge weigh this better debating based on your advocacy test?
It's subjective.
It's subjective. All right, you're not taking a stance on anything. Is economic engagement good or bad?
It depends what kind. So status quo economic engagement, that's colonial, is bad.
Why is it colonial?
Because all of our legacy cards from the context of the U.S. exploiting Latin America,
How do you
intervening when it's good for us.
How do you change that?
That's what the AF is. Medina and Tropenko are two good solvency advocates for bringing counter histories to the forefront of our policy discussions.
Bringing counter histories. What are these
Yeah.
counter histories you bring?
So right now, in the literature about Latin America, there's a dominant narrative of like U.S. progress and stuff. Medina and Tropenko say we need to let the like colonized people and their stories that have been relegated
Okay.
come to the forefront of our discussions.
Name the colonized person whose story you bring to this debate.
That's not a relevant question. The idea
What the
behind
hell?
Medina, no, just listen. The Medina and Trofinenko evidence is talking about opening up space for those histories. We don't presume to speak for all of the colonized. We are just open to those stories.
Okay. What is epistemic disobedience?
It's a delinking from hegemonic forms of knowledge production.
What is hegemonic forms of knowledge production in debate?
In debate?
Yeah.
Literature that's US-centric, I guess.
Literature that's US-centric.
I mean, it's like multifaceted, but that's
Okay,
one form of it.
that's cool. What is the black-white binary good or bad?
The black-white binary.
And what is
Oh,
racism?
bad.
The black-white binary can be helpful in certain educational settings, but the idea behind it as a social movement is probably a bad thing because it obscures other forms of racism.
What are these other forms of racism?
Our Martinez evidence talks about how Kissinger said nothing important happens in the South because there's
Okay.
more racism than just black-white.
It's not the only form of racism.
And like we've invisibilized racism. People don't see racism towards Latin America as racism because of the black-white.
Is
paradigm.
neoliberalism good or bad?
The like really exploitative parts of it are bad.
The really exploitative parts, so like the status quo stuff, right?
Yeah, there might be like one example of it, maybe taking someone out of poverty,
Is
but
it
in the abstract,
is it ethical to take a stance on why these things could be good in a debate space?
sure you can say neoliberalism is good,
Is that something the one I see would disagree with?
probably.
Okay, that's fine.
Right.
Okay, Randy, yours?
Good bro, good job. Yeah, Tom Brady.
Yeah, we played frisbee a lot at camp too. Got some practice with the throwing arm. It's gonna be 2 off, and then the second case swap.
You start the camera.
Yeah, I did. I got the 1 ace. Should I just turn this around? I'm just gonna speak from here. Okay? You have it, right? I'll just save the box.
I'll take a look. Alright, we good.
I'm trying to get this camera together. There we go. Okay. Anyone not ready? First off is the counter-advocacy. To avoid a discussion of the topic seems to revert back to the historical discriminatory educational practice utilized to disempower and subject blacks to an inferior position within society. This was in 33. The Negroes have a bare chance to acquire knowledge in a political manner, but the bosses are abidable to line them through thoroughly. Negroes are supposed to discuss the issues of the day. Free trade tariff will court the League of Nations. These Negro workers are supposed to tell people how to win. They seek offer to put by Negro messenger. Another important task of the Negroes on the police hospital. Negro party while doing so much of the race. Now the rejection of the state institution education is akin to policy of racial exclusion as seen previously. Woodson in 33, a measure was introduced legislature to the Constitution of the United States. In school history, the bill was killed by someone who made it possible. A point that it will never have to do the Negro Studies Constitution, like a structure made by the confirmation of policy of keeping the Negro in. Explain that the state has a valuable in the fight to break down oppression. This Franklin in 93 needs the court of the Congress to present declared by fiat that the United States is called by or facility moving in the direction that reflects a commitment to a goal such a point from the people who must work to attain the goal who states that ourselves. State already no interest in achieving now all the reason why the state advantage of reasons to vote and act and engage in means to be known as attack the oppression. We must infiltrate it. Wilson in 70 is erroneous to think one can isolate oneself from the political system, exercise power of the environment which it resides into great barrier to reject opportunity to join the man's government and organs of power structure. Military should be completed with the method of the oppressor. We can obtain valuable know-how, effective struggles, tactic plans, and analysis of sophisticated application, mental. Now this is an imperative that our people enter the organs of established. Now the world can be changed by the force of truth, responsibility, and consciousness. We are not powerless. Intellectual bear unique responsibility for thinking and shaping the general moral consciousness. Kettles in 96. The world might actually change by the force of truth. We are not powerful. We must recognize the power of the world to change history for a good intellectual unique responsibility to thinking to shape the conscience. We must become words of depend predictive warning there. When it's only such scruples can change moral conscience enough to make minds for next off is counter-advocacy. When I joined debate, I was told that I would fix my speech problem. I would use it to improve my English skills, to communicate with others, and economically engage with them. It's Esau all over again. I started out small, going 3-3 at totals with no one recognizing me, to becoming Centennial KK. The people point to and say, oh, look at those Koreans learning how to debate so well and working hard to win tournaments. My hard work cutting hard through sleep with them. Similarly into a traditional form of debate turned me into a model minority. This year I choose to engage through who I am, through my experience with a diverse team, Daryl Works, and exposes to non-traditional argument. Michael and I embrace a counter methodology to expose the myth of the model minority through a process of conscientization. Our counter methodology is a bear way to liberate a prosecutor. First, they are wrong. Racism moved beyond society and biological roots, and now rooted within differential racism. Neo-racism targeted against immigrant biology in 2005. Languages expressing new lasting articulation, social practice, collective representation. We have determined whether esophagus hegemony, development function, immigration, and soft for race provides for school immigrants have suffered discrimination, xenophobic violence, stereotypes, playing essential roles, sociological significant, biological ones, it's racism who is dominant theme, not biological heredity, but a cultural difference of racism, which is not possible, it's superior to with a differential racism. Now, this racism manifests itself in the myth of the model minority myth, portraying Asian Americans solely as hardworking methodology, focusing on Asian body, exposing the myth is a critical one. There are three impacts. One, the oppression of Asian Americans continue. Two, the Asian body is justified. The oppression of other minorities. The three, the resentment and tensions are created between these minority groups. Chang in 93, Asian Americans are portrayed as hardworking, intellectual, successful, belief in the bottom minority allows justification of unique discrimination faced by Asian Americans. Do you find racial minority himself from the harsh rate to become models of self-respect? These statements become out of subject of social beyond. However, that's the label of tool oppression, which works to dual harm by denying the present day discrimination. Asian American to legitimize the oppression of racial minority. The myth has gained following both inside and outside the Asian community. The myth that create an audience unsympathetic to problems of Asian Americans. They can inspire for society to put Professor Yamada tells of the reaction of a literature class to outspoken Asian American writer. One student blurted out that she was offended by his militant tone. Surely the other writers had been more militant. They said they were not offended by the Black American Chicanos, Native American writer. They understood the anger expressed by the Black and Chicano. They emphasized the Native American, Asian American made me angry because I didn't even know Asian American felt oppressed. The model minority rendered the oppression of Asian Americans invisible to be outsiders, to be without social services. They think Asian Americans have 60 officials had them not funding for social service program, college administration, and excluded Asian American from the opportunity program. Income disparity for Asian American groups are glaring. Asian American families that work more work up to household wage disparity parent geographic locations considered the myth will work to dual harm by hurting other racial minorities who are blamed for not being successful. African and Latinos and poor whites are told, look at those Asian American, anyone can begin into this country. The blame is justified by the meritocratic theory proven by the Asian Americans. We are complicit in the oppression of other racial minorities. The blame is created for Asian American among Asian American, Latino, poor whites, the model moment. So that community of skateboard Korean American, Los Angeles, government, rights, Korean now view themselves as acute feel competent when anger of the Black minority, model minority myth is established racial hierarchy, which creates the oppression of Asian American performance, all conscientization, process of naming our world, and understanding forces of oppression, but sort of real world change. Also, in 2007, conscientization, being able to name the world meaningful act, and right now, understand the impact forces of oppression have on lives. The process involves the constant clarification, what we say to one, working around the world, provokes recognition, one dynamically and makes it self-recognition, people to beginning of the active transformation, naming the world, project act change, go on case. 174 peer-reviewed articles, so 167 non-edited books are disconnected from the themes and reality within Latin America today, most focused on foreign policies and exposed to international global issues and international security, with 94 scholarly publication qualified as foreign policy analysis rather than current or trending themes of international relations. Now ask, is the interrogation of the 1AC any different than that? Here's the business as usual. 89% of the scholarly work make U.S. foreign policy central focus. 51% articles and book focus on foreign policy indication and reaction of U.S. Latin America. 40% policy work only analyze U.S. foreign policy towards Latin America. Having scholars and scholarship that are rooted in Western institutions focus on Latin America does not count. Here's what constitutes different of me. Must pay attention to international political, economic, international drug trafficking. Now, these are some of the mistakes made based on the gaps. Here's the dilemma of their Bertucci evidence. Bertucci in 2006, it's practical and policy impact. U.S. foreign policy makes a prosecute only deliver truncated picture of the financial shaping their hemisphere. Now, third, performative gut check. The affirmative presentation within the discourse of 1AC has no stylistic difference and no performative invitation truly engage the other. Their speech act resembles those of all the top of the national circuit teams, are varying only in the content of message, which are access to construct through a different foreign engagement. Stingle in 2012, there exists a need to engage proactively and upon Western thinking and actively their tendency to accept colonial modes. However, they do not accept political thought on massive epistemic different roles, looking geographical and there's really tolerate other talents because again, just act violently Australia, unify the patriarchal research operation colonial made to inspire existing economy authorities, gender, sexuality, knowledge to generally rank different Western academic different in the old rates, stopping tolerating credit, comprehending decolonial modes of thinking, entirely different modes of thinking is required to manage radical history, to decolonize, integrate epistemic disobedience. Now turn the vague advocacy is the independent voting issue. The idea of epistemic disobedience is a methodology, conceptual practice within knowledge production. Affirmative vague stance on interrogation is not epistemic disobedience, but the opposite. This Stingle in 2013, among people of leadership positions, they're increased and make decision, but embedded in decision, predetermined work of release and responsibility so vague that outrage and how people would plead if arbitrary fail to fulfill minimal demand. So it's not exclusive small politicians, threatening phenomenon human being. The decision making one major driver is flight from responsibility is an interesting factor how we follow the development of the education training of highly skilled members of society. The leadership means critical thinking. These education standards degree about being corrected by teachers, engaged by the having discourse, forced them to teach them, forced to live, being withdrawn. That turned their conception of race is outdated and problematic. Calling during 2011 the concept post-racial and post-acting off the brush aside amid the competition. Who can declare the most representing the race is still divided upon one party, ask to proclaim this act of ask another person population, yet another people who say but that use another term for post-acting have actually claimed now being refuted with such the gap with being refuted, what is being affirmed in a discussion, Grand Canada, what is being affirmed in possible future that might be post-acting with the mobilization, as no races including most to the opposite, suggesting a sentence. There's also no call for the question of such a future who wants to talk whether that future and questions are not deserving of our attention. You can mark the card there. Now, the post-box is now restricted by Blackness. Conflicts a liquid shapeshifter passed in 2011. Post-box while rooted in Blackness is not restricted by this conflict malleable state and conflict liquid shapeshifter. There's no consensus about what it is. Post-box there's no patient with self-worth identity cultural. It's my will mean to pursue the individual. Black artists now feel personally interested. There is no sacred cow. There is not even greater civil rights. So your post-box ultimately to expand collective identity. No infinity. This involves breakthrough intercultural fluency, effort and mode switching out such a fluency leader. Blackness is such a fluency undergraduate Blackness and important part but not necessarily dominate the persona. You can mark the card there.
Just so we're clear, you read only green?
Yeah.
Okay. So your first K, you read this Woodson evidence, say we don't discuss the topic. Where does Woodson talk about
Not about the topic. We say you should engage the United States federal government. You should work within the
Does
powers.
your Woodson evidence talk about it in the structure of debate, or just like in abstract we should engage the government?
No, it talks about the structure of the United States federal government, how not engaging in it, saying
So
that
what kind of
it.
engagement is Woodson advocating?
maybe stuff that changes the United States federal government, like your
And what
status
part of
quo
the
argument,
context
saying
is
that the
that?
United States federal government is neoliberal in the status quo. It's just uniqueness for us. That's the reason why we should engage the United States federal government and
How do you
change it.
engage it?
How do you engage it?
Yeah.
The
That's
Woodson
your
card.
choice.
Yeah.
That's your choice. Engage it some way you want. Change the state. Just
Like
don't.
your plan could be like give, I don't know, food aid
So
to
we
Latin
can give
America.
that our
How
plan as a
about
tax
spend
relief
all the
or-
money in the United States to bankrupt it? What?
No, it was very clear after Wednesday Crossing. She do nothing about the state.
Okay. So what is a rejection of the state?
The 1AC. The 1AC says that the state is bad right now and that we should go through a process of epistemic disobedience, which is not engaging the state.
Okay,
Epistemic
so-
disobedience is giving the middle finger to
All
everyone.
right. So how do you use the state in debate? Like what is how you engage it?
You
in
engage
state?
it, maybe
reading
like-
plain text?
Like, it's, basically, yes, we say that you should engage the resolution
So
in the
does
state
it
and have a
necessitate
plan
like
text.
fiated action?
No, this is a counter methodology. This is not a framework or T violation.
I
This is saying
understand.
a methodology that focuses on
I
state
don't understand
structures
what we
is
do
better. Because you don't do that in the YNC. You're like, oh my god, the state is bad. And then you do nothing to change it. You don't question the
Well,
underlying structure.
Tell me
of
how
the
a
state.
policy act, how like the after you read IPR changes.
It's
the
not a
state.
policy
IPR.
F. I think that was just made clear. We're saying that engaging the state is
So
a
your
better. Just
second
saying,
K.
just critiquing the state, it's neoliberal and the
Alright.
status quo does nothing
Sounds
to
good.
resolve
Your
it.
second K.
Infiltrate
You
the
say,
institutions.
this year I chose to engage through who I am. How do you do that in the topic?
I engage through how we have been portrayed as model minorities and how that is a bad thing. We
You do
say
that
that
every
breaking,
round?
what?
You do that every round?
Yeah, we do that every F round. We run in pretty much every next round. We say that we should engage, break down the myth of the model minority. Our process of conscientization is a constant clarification.
I'm like
what's
you
your-
who go for
what's
Sir
your
Neil
link
look
to the
good on
app?
the neck.
What's your link to the app? How do we like preclude your discussion of?
I mean, we have several arguments. First, it's you guys should not get a permutation. You have chosen in this debate to
Wait,
forego
wait.
the traditional notions of competition.
Okay,
Therefore,
Second
I'm
link
gonna
argument.
confirm argument. I
the
want
second
to-
link argument is a ballot bar card. We're saying that your notion of racism is outdated and wrong. We say that
Okay,
it has
what is
transferred to
racism?
a differential
What is the
racism.
new form of racism? What's the
A
correct?
differential form of racism that is not based on like these cultural, biological, state-on-state roots, like United States versus Latin America, but like immigrants, like
I
Mexican
can spit
immigrants
off
coming
more
into the
links
United
if you
States.
want. You're focused on the black-white binary
Wait, no, I
stuff.
just want to know what racism is. So you say it's not state-to-state violence. What is it?
Well, this is critiquing the black-white binary. We're saying that your notion
What
that
is
it can
racism
be
not
useful
correct?
is probably a bad one because it ignores things
So
like
what is the
Asian.
correct?
What is the correct one?
Yeah.
Start at the middle.
Yeah.
Asian
What?
body. Start at the middle.
We
Asian
say
body. We say
the
that's
Asian
start
body is probably a good one.
Starting from- Okay, stop, bro. I have 7:24 left.
Yep.
Do you want the camera to a demo?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You go for that, Megan?
Yeah. Well, they hired me. I used to debate at Sea Bird.
Oh,
Yeah.
The bird.
Yeah, and I wasn't part of that symbolic suicide stuff. I ran around Blackness last year.
Michael,
I debated with.
why do you want to label the two off-case flows?
Black framework, Asian counter-advocacy.
Okay.
I debated with Nick Neighbors last year.
oh.
Labor.
Before he went like Bojo.
Order will be engagement, pedagogy, black framework, and then the Asian counter-advocacy.
Pedagogy is the stuff where we took a dump on, right?
Yeah.
Alright, whenever you're ready.
The affirmative radical right with her thought about Latin America's status quo engagement prioritizes the U.S. interest in a civilizing mission rooted in the logic of European colonialism. That's we are in gross struggle. That's the states, the extermination, Latino, other motivates continue ecological destruction, equivalence and extinction. That's letter Robinson proved. Their state focused arguments are ideologically bankrupt and dangerous. They have no defense on this flow, which means there's extinction level dissent to any of their interpretations as long as it doesn't solve 100% of the case. Even if they win that ethical policy action is possible, that's not an excuse for the colonial system. This whole rejection of colonialism is a prerequisite. It also makes a ideology co-ops argument, which is the shake evidence, which is a reason why their straight focused arguments always inevitably fail pedagogy. The what he sees epistemic disobedience, dealing, knowledge, production of colonialism necessary and sufficient to avoid multiple extinction narrows ethical of the apathy, best form of engagement, counter-historical analysis, problematized myths of national dominance and revealed colonial nature, modernity, real prerequisite to any topic education. That's Medina and Tropenko also takes out their specificity arguments because this is the most specific strategy. The foreign policy community is deeply ingrained with Western bias and the ideology of coloniality. Thoughts of academics and technocrats spill over into the policy we create. We, as academics, utilize this information, have a responsibility to undercover and resist this symbolic of dominancy status quo. It inevitably leads to extinction. Now, they say that the Bertucci of this means we don't actually engage. It's a question of our role as debaters. We are called to engage these structures by affirming the resolution. We refuse to do so. That is our Alcoff evidence. We are critiquing these structures of knowledge. They say unity and performance, which will upset this is better. Single evidence doesn't matter because our performance is uniquely good. It's something that we should do. Epistemic disobedience is actually supported in the literature. That's our big law evidence. They say the advocacies are bad. We are specific. Epistemic disobedience is what we will defend in this round. It is a broad strategy, but that's not a reason as voter doing this. It's also good in this context because it's a broad approach. It's necessary to solve for all of the ideological flaws of these acts. What they say our conception of race is wrong. We capture their interpretation. They say in cross-text that is not state to state. That is not the what I say. We say it is an individual question. That is our Martinez evidence. Say fluidity of blackness. That is the what I say. That's also the Martinez evidence. Now we are the best form of interruption. Educational spheres are key middle of 13. Knowledge is critical. Control knowledge to be controlled. To decolonize because knowledge is necessary. Decolonize knowledge to about decolonize big education. Decolonize education schooling. To free learning, creativity, learn should focus on studies and people should take precedence over the formation of experts, citizens at the service. They state a framing argument on this flow is that they think we are trying to engage the state in the right way. It's a question of engaging institutions or institutions of knowledge, education. That is what we do, which means all of their arguments are relevant now. Their black framework.
We need the 1AC was analysis of the state and how policies interact with Latin America. We affirm engagement with the state, not in a traditional way. An ideological shift is a prior question that analysis was done. But we access the racial impacts by suppression is based on the minds of dominance which must be rejected at an ideological level only. The analysis of singularity is that their interpretation necessitates the enforcement of single policy that selective focus replicates the effective structure policy. The 1AC criticizes that ours. So even if they'll say that their interpretation is very loose, it's vague, which is the reason why you should reject that's their own evidence. Secondly, is that it definitely does need policy focus on the state, which is something that we will predict were the best form of state engagement. Move 9. Radical policies often characterized by a sense of the state itself and inherently the problem. Every hegemonic organization is to be challenged by counter-hegemonic practices. We now witness a revolution. Rather, many different interventions challenge down hegemonic practices. Radical policies not about which are completely from existing institutions. We have no other choice but to engage with hegemonic practices in order to challenge them. If we do not, we leave the door open for others to take control of the system. Authority, regulation, right-wing authoritarian groups are only too happy to heterogeneity. It cannot be limited. Hegemony is all continue precarious. Example, counter-hegemonic intervention can be probably political interventions. Always one that engages with certain aspect of existing hegemony needs to challenge the existing order. Critique involves engaging counter-hegemonic practices. Do not limit difference. All come together against common adversaries, not to choose withdrawal and critique as engagement and using the state debate for real separates debate from real participation, ignores the imperialist basis of our activity, rehabilitate the state. The policymaker debate comes with a sense of detachment. Participants are able to distance themselves simulations, detach debate from real participation. When we call for government policymaker, we are not meeting the colonial legacy, the deception, our place. We cannot wish away horrific charge of the objective stance. The policymaker is an imperialist persona relies upon acceptable forms of evidence that relate to the normative practice around that. Reduce and maintain networks of repression and policy. Practice simulates the perfect government charged with nostalgic law. We only humiliate debate away from help us face the reality of majority of the lending to our political science work on civilization, pressure, public saves, solid debates on politics, a way to broke ideological argument debate. There's contemporary policy and simulation of real politics. The nostalgists could have co-reaction because we set to futility politics. We retreat paving against the old concepts with its familiar categories of practice still exists. Closer to politics goes on a regionalistic fashion by corporate frustration, awareness of the village after comparably continue to rank reagreeing about policy change. The results of the past example these separate rights movements and like a museum to us now do we live in an area capable of producing politics begin to preserve religion with hill to deal with former duties. We not prefer to roll certain enough to solve voice look if it's a temporary policy fails to address the group of new political stagnation can accept develop movements of politics for a temporary situation. Now they say topic discussion is key. We meet that. That is the check. That's their only interpretation. We are the most relevant discussion of the topic, which means they can't go for this Asian counter-advocacy. Permutation to both their advocacy is intentionally and functionally competitive lens can and does inform the 1AC view on race relations. The problem that we isolate with black-white paradigm is that groups non-white, non-black ethnic groups together and destroys the nuances of race relations. Perm is in separate. We defend the entirety of the 1AC we access. Their claims of racism against immigrants we know better than most. The violence perpetrated against Latina and Latino immigrants in the U.S. measures like SB 1070 prove conceptions of racial inequality toward these immigrants exist in the U.S. and only an ideological shift solved. Now the 1AC was conscientization. Their evidence talks about how we need to bring these issues to the forefront and understand different conceptions of racial identity. That is what the 1AC is. That's our Martinez evidence gut check. They don't solve our role of the ballot, which is a shift toward which is affirming economic engagement through epistemic disobedience. That's clarified and cross-checked. We definitely access theirs means you should vote for the permutation hybriding self-best grandiosity is 2K. Overlap forms of race and subordination or both resistance, civilized process, modernization, equally critique, development, and our center of the idea of protection, breaking, destruction, examine our hegemonic fashion structure, right, what is the keywords such together, fields, hybrid, unified, gathering together, disparate themes are the experience of the imperialist, secular, sociological, historical, fascinating, interdisciplinary, cultural, studies, and net benefit is intersectionality, reduction, and compensation, like raising to a single cost field, endorsing combined approach, like the 1AC, more than 7 intellectual secret cuts, revolution, to reduce complexity, socialist to a single institution, to complexity, solution to be explained away by simple as the habit of thought, utopianism, and diversity of misread, simple cause, one can live right, changing only one thing of balance, evil disappear. Early 20th century, the root cause of the worst human miseries that believe there is a root cause. We reduce penalties to a single cause, social science, over time, super cause, logical facets, simplification, assuming what is to be proven or proceeds that we're already proven theories, generalization, proven in any simple sort of discipline debates, certain sort of explanations bound to be discovered in discipline pretending to be social sciences. Don't let them claim solvency for the app. They say it's a starting point. It doesn't access the advocacy about Latin America. The myth of modern minority probably is a bad thing that we should dispel, but it doesn't solve for different forms of racism that are regionally affected. They don't access it. It's specifically true for colonialism, gross over 2K. And analysis of privilege, economic aspects of the expensive cultural and ideological determination. This led to an understanding of estimation, colonial racial hierarchies, and analytical cultural complexity. The second, decolonization will have to adjust the racial, ethnic, gender, sexual, gender, and higher economic hierarchies. The first, decolonization led project following the estimation, racial, ethnic hierarchies, reproduced white domination, young European, no radical project, Latin America, be sensible with not dismantling the colonial racial hierarchies, underestimation problems of coloniality had introduced these project disillusion with leftist project, Latin American denial of co-evil, and this reinforces the coloniality of power. That is they say the political dissent to their alternative or counter-advocacy in the context of Latin America. Also, the MOVE evidence can be cross-applied to this. It's a question of a targeted strategy for engaging institutions which they don't access. That's also can be cross-applied to the state flow too. Let me get some more cards here.
This is what happens.
The K ignores the complexity of racial and ethnic hierarchies, only the decolonized power in relation to growth will go to K. Deconstructing the other as the happening distant states of pastime emerges simultaneously with the modern colonial capitalist rotates with its colonial racial hierarchies that created the condition for developmental slavery, reproduced the illusion that development occurs through the nation state, overlooked the alternative more strategic anti-systemic political and racial power relations to reach are constituted by racial and ethnic hierarchies that unlock colonial history. There can be no radical correction to reach without decolonized power relations. I think they're going to go for this immigrant distinction in racism. We definitely captured that. It's a question of racial hierarchies on an individual level. Those apply in the U.S. as well. It's also just a question of black-white paradigm. We reject that, which means we solve their advocacy.
All right, let's first talk about this engagement flow. Who is the Latin American other?
I wouldn't isolate a single person or a single group. It's people who have been colonized, which is a large and diverse population.
Just the people colonized in Latin America?
I wouldn't say just that, but that's one example. That's what the NC isolates.
Okay, clarification. Did you read the Reed-Brinkley card?
Yes.
You did, okay. Now, on Asian counter-advocacy, you read this intersectionality card. How is the ad intersectional?
Because the 1AC is analysis of how colonial, racial, ethnic, sexual, and gender hierarchies as well.
You talk about sexual differences in the 1AC.
The gross vocal card does, yes. It's a question of ideology, how these things intersect. You should default to the 1AC, the gross
And epistemic disobedience is able to capture this? It seems like
epistemic disobedience is a strategy which inherently takes into account these intersectionalities.
No, your Bertucci card seems to indicate that epistemic disobedience is a method.
Bertucci doesn't say anything about epistemic disobedience.
Your
Bertucci is a unique
card
discipline.
seems to say that it is a method to deconstruct coloniality. How does it address sexuality or
Are you
gender?
shifting this to the Mignolo card now?
No, I'm asking about how epistemic disobedience accounts for stuff like gender, language, or sexuality.
Because it's a nuanced version of a colonial critique. The Mignolo evidence talks about how these intersections have produced a colonial system.
You say that the counter-advocacy cannot account for colonialism in Latin America, is that correct?
The counter-advocacy as a starting point does not.
Okay, then how does the F account for colonialism in other places like Asia?
I'd say that we start with a resolutional focus, which is why we talk about colonialism specific to Latin America.
And the resolution is Latin America. How does it focus on Asia?
Right, so the Mignolo evidence is not solely specific to Latin America. It's a questioning of dominance, of whiteness, of Westernism.
Okay, the Black Framework flow. This is your move card from the line. We have no other choice but to engage with hegemonic practices. Where do you do that?
Counter-hegemonic practices.
No, engage with hegemonic practices.
Right, the move card, I understand you took one part of it. MOVE is all about
it's the
how
part
we
you
need to...
bolded and underlined and
right, I
emphasized.
understand. MOVE is a defense of critique as engagement.
No, I'm just asking, how do you engage with hegemonic practices?
Yeah, and I'm answering that question. The
Okay.
MOVE card is a defense of critique as engagement. We take these institutions, we critique them, we talk about the ideological foundations of these institutions.
Yeah, but how do you
also
engage in
contain
that?
the Bertucci card, which is a spillover.
No,
That's how we
but-
access these institutions.
How do you
because
engage-
ideology is key.
Like, in your 1AC, in your 2AC, your epistemic disobedience, how did that engage with these institutions? How did that engage these hegemonic practices?
Because our argument is that debate itself is a form of the foreign policy community or a microcosm of it.
What's engagement then?
What are you engaging? Like, I don't get how
What is
epistemic
you can't
disobedience
tell me
is
what
engaging.
engaging the state actually
I don't
is.
get how
Separating
epistemic
context.
disobedience is engaging or doing these hegemonic
The critique as a
practices.
whole is engagement. That's
So
what
you're
Lou said.
critiquing these hegemonic practices.
We are a counter-hegemonic practice. That is what the
Yeah,
MOVE
but
card
you're
is
not a
all about.
hegemonic practice. Rep.
I'm actually good.
I have 9:49 left. Great, now I have no time to prep for my 1 hour.
Stand. Counter-advocacy, Asian counter-advocacy, engagement pedagogy.
Counter-advocacy, Asian counter-advocacy?
No, just Asian counter-advocacy.
Just the Asian counter-advocacy case?
Both are good?
Okay. Welcome to the world of performative debate. In this type of debate, you don't get a permutation because the White explicitly said that debate is a question competing methodologies within the debate. Our methodologies are one that focus on our age body, our personal experience, something they have drawn currently in YC. Brophy are two white dudes from Arizona who do not question their own privilege, do not have a methodology to challenge and trouble the debates, which mean that our performance nearly better to solve this. It's solved because of the myth of the mild mind is a tangible impact within the current society. It causes psychological violence against Asian Americans. It causes depression against other minorities because the Asian Americans are put on a pedestal through oppressed other minorities. We break down this performance by exposing the myth of the minority and acknowledge the myth. The only reason why the myth happens is because Asians in this current society believe it, which is the reason why our performance is better. The tender ways and crossings at the role of balance to who did the better debate, whose performance is better, whose performance is better to liberate press group. That's what the question they're about to answer. The permutation, the textually, functionally, competitive bullshit is something based on traditional debate. This is a performance double term with epistemic disobedience because they see that epistemic disobedience is breaking those traditional notions of debate that they try to uphold. And also, this is preferable because the permutation is a violent act of bias dealings when they try and commodify our performance for the ballot. This is impact reasonable negative because they uphold the power structure they try to down. Now, someone being in theory, they don't get a permutation when they have decided not to instrumentally affirm the resolution. It's a question of opportunity cost. The permutation is what questions opportunity cost. They're not going to do the opportunity cost by defending advocacy. They should not get this because also the permutation undermines the class necessary to train performing debaters to defend their methodology against white supremacists. Also, they focus on the wrong part of the black-white binary. Who is the Latino others when they're Asians, when the United States is domestically being oppressed? This is a better start for the black-white binary. That is link number one to the affirmative. The second argument is the myth of the minority. Construction of white supremacists never allow examination of both methodologies. They will use them against one another. Asians are darlings of the right now, and their bodies are used to police minority bodies by claiming that they're suffering as part of their own internal advocacy. He says that the whites is conscientization. I call bullshit. Your link silence is the link of commission because the racial oppression of black Latinos and poor whites that discuss and understood about individuals which dwells over the discrimination of Asian Americans. Also, the Osajima evidence says that conscientization is a project specific to Asian Americans, and obviously they are not Asian, which is the reason why you cannot solve this either. And also, they're arguing why the whites is not conscientization. It's because conscientization based on personal experience and the relating to others. They don't have a narrative. They don't have any music. They don't have anything that breaks down traditional notions of debate, which is the reason why it's their role in the ballot is arbitrary, and another reason it's rejected key because you cannot engage through the lens of epistemic disobedience. Crowds that focus on other types of methodologies that are able to tell you. We have a better role about it. Our role about it is who best performatively methodology liberates the press groups within the debate space. They don't mean either this because our methodology of conscientization is better because conscientization process of learning world interaction with different types of people that has an internal process to make us understand what ratio. We performantly solve this better as will be put on the case when they don't do this either. The impact of the exclusive role about is that they don't allow examination of other types of methodologies, which is a strategy of white supremacy to try to support these discussions. All the hybrid arguments are bullshit because hybrid is a tactical pile. The Glorious 77, liberation theology, that the common spirit of presence and adherence to class one mind, single category people seeking liberation. That's an easy way to limit specific complaints. A clever way to turn aside to decide liberation theology is a lay skimming to keep my group circling vital, way of holding eliminating oppression. Does not see destroy the roots of oppression, really change the manner in which oppression manifests itself. He means clever ways to share power, but he keeps these leads and things to the I call bullshit all the intersectionality arguments too because they do not solve intersectionality. It's clear from the white team. They don't take an intersectional approach. If they don't get a permutation, they should not be able to solve this argument. We are a better starting point for colonialism too because of the because you have to drop the battle for everything that racial colonialists have moved beyond state barriers based on a differential foreign race. Immigration focus is better. They only do not focus on immigration focus. They do be focused on foreign wars away, which is the reason why they cannot solve this and the countermethod is solves it better. Go to engagement flow. Your extinction level dissent is a link to my performance double turn argument. The extinction is a traditional notion of impact calculus. Trying to claim these while doing this is another reason why you were the false heroes and not the type of good methodology that you put. The Latino others is also going to link to the black-white binary criticism of the carrier, which is the reason why you don't have an impact. Go to the pedagogy flow. Major mess up here. Do you know what's the problem when the 1NC spends 3.5 minutes and the 2NC answers it in 1 minute? Their Bertucci evidence is a direct contradiction with the way they have presented the case. It says that when we make sense of Latin America with the UN forcing policy will get it has bad impacts like policy focus there. But that's exactly what they do. They do not cite a single one of those comments others within the YC. They don't have a single paper from a Latin American think tank. Freaking Weirda is a professor of IRA at UGA, an American university at the Wilson Center of American Foreign Policy. Give us a break. He is a definition of American foreign policy. And also, theory is a paternalist argument. They are two white dudes trying to liberate Latin America in this debate today. Let's get real here. They do not come to grips with their white privilege, something that creates the problems that they isolate in the YC. Now, this is the impact is a takeout to the entire firm. Do not buy any of their our method has a risk of solving BS because the Brophy is stuck in the same mindset of the mess of status quo. Also, this is a performative offense for us because we do not link to the U.S. foreign policy focus arguments that they criticize and bring this and because we're the only team that bring this out means that we perform their method better. Reason why you should vote negative. Now, having scholars that are rooted when the Western institution focus on Latin America does not count. Your Bertucci evidence, even if scholars willing to do some scholars will embrace Latin American relations, such efforts not likely enough to real or God's product I would approach it to American. Also, you have to focus on Latin American foreign policy. Bertucci again, there are a few policy articles books on foreign policy Latin America, South American countries, these policy foreign policy for the U.S. are understood I recognize this where Irish scholars plan to explain has the development theory, the cause inner side which solve policy issue of the hemisphere. Now, extended performance, double turn argument. Brophy's performance does not embrace the spirit of epistemic disobedience. They are false liberal heroes who pretend to be the left, but really just hustle of the right. On links, words that they do not disrupt the debate stage. There are no narratives, no music, no poetry, nothing outside of conventional norms of debate. The one see just a spewing of a bunch of cards as fast as you can without doing anything. Also, to second link arguments, them on the negative, while criticizing the team, they go for arguments like neoliberal domination of Latin America good in front of our own coach. Yes, we judge you and caught you doing that. Hold them responsible for the ingenuine discourse that they bring into the debate stage. This is an independent voting issue because it's unethical to do this as contradictions to sustain white supremacy and let it be all encompassing. Now, the third argument is the fluidity across the Brophy does not take a stance on freaking anything. When we ask things like it's the economic case to good or bad, it's neoliberalism to go bad. What's your role about it? We do not take their stance on that. I have the one see there is a link to our Segal evidence because the Segal evidence says that you need to evidence disobedience. You need to take a stance and then use that stance to give the middle finger to power structure within the white sea. They are obviously trying to be all encompassing so that they could just get a ballot. A reason why they don't have 4 epistemic disobedience. Now we solve this better because we engage in a provocative enterprise that obsessed Western mode of thinking. The narrative on top of the Asian counter-receipt. Our performance does better through our counter-advocacy. Their perception of actual methodology just to redefine the patriarchal and racist operation of power. Also, their invaded advocacy proves this argument because epistemic disobedience is a process. It's not just a plant test. It's something that you have to embody through your performance, which means that everything that they do should be counted in the debate because decision makers require taking responsibility. Now, finally, the post-Blackness argument. The post-Blackness argument means that their conception of race and the Latino other is not just a single Latino other. There is a black-white binary within Latin America. There are black Afro-Cubans, there are black Mexicans. These are all things that they paper over by just saying that there's a Latino other being exterminated. Now, the better focus on this is a focus on post-Blackness because post-Blackness is the fluidity identity. They're mestizos, they're black. Latin American society is not just Latin America. There's not all Hispanics. These are the type of things that they paper over, which causes racial discrimination within the status quo. This feeds our black-white binary arguments because it proves that your focus on the black-white binary is bad. It also straight turns the warrants of their trophy grounds because the problem of today's society is groups are clearly bounded with color-coded identities that the elite set for them. They buy into these color-coded identities without examining the mixed structures of Latin America. That was what the Hollinger and Patterson evidence said this way. See, now here's proof. Cuban civil society is anti-black. You engage with them. Allen 2011. Mestizo became an established ideology because they included Afro-Cubans while maintaining white control. Cuban nationalism helped that were actually grateful for the abolition of slavery. And Cyprus and white have made to liberate them. Racism time he talked about socialization. Ultra whiteness must involve the social status of blackness. Myth of the racial equality help keep Afro-Cubans there. Racism, the support of characters and distortion. Now, domestic trade-off. It is unconscious to protest American wars outside when there are domestic wars at home. There is an unspoken positive assumption that takes the permanence of domestic warfare as granted. This is another to the race focus. Rodriguez 2008. If we have to approach racial neoliberalism and U.S. domination globally, it's nothing short of unconscionable to expend political energy to protest American wars elsewhere. The left's willingness to fundamentally tolerate and accompany unwillingness to abolish the institutionalized dehumanization of contemporary policemen and international private. The policy assumption takes for granted the mystified permanence of domestic warfare. I'm the prophet later soon. It seems content engages desperate attempts to make it counter domestic warfare. Why do we forward a creative plus radically change society and transform the premise of the convention? Domestic warfare is short-term will and policy war. Our moment suggests the need for a political rupturing of the techniques and manual of domestic warfare. Why do they call it domestic warfare?
The last piece of Rodriguez evidence.
Yeah.
What does that mean about the 1AC then? Should we just ignore what the 1AC isolates as a problem?
You shouldn't ignore it. You should make their focus on the domestic wars at home, like their counter-advocacy.
How do we focus on the domestic wars at home and then talk about it?
It's explained how the domestic wars at home influence the wars abroad. Example number 1, Drug Reparations Act. The drug war is not just something in Mexico. It's something that's imprisoning people within the United States. Say that we should give reparations for these drug operations and use that to interrogate why the drug war has been exported elsewhere. Example number 2, the myth of the minority within the United States. The myth is something that works within the United States. Interrogate the power structure that happen here and how it influences your
colonial ideology. I understand you're talking about drugs and you're talking about the myth of the minority. How does that capture the 1AC?
It captures the 1AC because you could talk about domestic practices going on within the United States, the epistemological discourse that happens within U.S. foreign policy making, and to use those arguments for why we enslave black and brown and yellow bodies within the United States to explain how that affects our foreign policy elsewhere.
You say we focus on the wrong part of the black-white binary. How do we determine whether racism against Asians or racism against Latinos and Latinas?
Not our argument. We're saying that your papering over of the black-white binary in a way that only focuses on this Latina other is the issue because it papers over the differences even within the
Latino said the black-white binary only papers over that.
What are you talking about? The part in the cross-sex where we're like, Gabe's like, what's the Latino other? You're like, the people in Latin America.
Right.
That's essentializing identity that homogenizes the population of Latin America.
No, cross-sex, I remember me saying I don't pretend to speak for the other, and I think that it's a very diverse group. Secondly, I would say What part of that
first,
is
this is a-
exclusively a focus on that? Yes, the 1AC presented that.
Well,
It seems like
first,
you're going for a link of
I want to
omission
make a
here.
disclaimer here. This feeds really, really well into our vagueness argument about how you don't take a stance on anything, and the only way to solve epistemic disobedience is to take a stance and give existing power structures the middle finger. Except the second argument for that is that when you're in the 1AC, say the black white binary is bad, we should focus on the Latino others. That is what we're saying is focusing on this commoditizing view of the Latino identity. It's not just a Latino identity. There's white Latinas, there's black Latinas, there's
Right,
mestizos,
so we
and there's
talk
everything
about
in between.
Right, so we talk about that. I don't understand how we link, because the
You
1AC,
don't talk about that though. You say Latino other, and you ignore the black white binary within
what is a
binary
performance?
itself. What?
What is a performance?
A performance is your presence within the debate space as we define. The things, the knowledge that you produce, the way you produce it, all of these are relevant aspects of a performance.
Okay, so knowledge is a relevant aspect of a performance.
Of course.
Okay, so why is breaking debate norms, well, actually first, what is a breaking of a debate norm?
Something that's non-traditional. You can define that in the way you
Cool,
want. We're
sweet.
saying that your non-traditionalist is bullshit. The 1AC is just a bunch of cards read very fast. There's no music, there's no poetry, there's nothing that actually troubles the conventional rules of the debate game.
So as long as we break norms, we access your performance arguments?
No. We already said it's too late for that. And second argument is there's a lot more dissets to your performance. You want me to list those off again?
No, I got them, thanks.
Right. Or again. It's gonna be the black framework. Let me just look at that.
Oh, yeah, this. In the drop off?
I'll save it. It is now in there.
Alright, cool.
Can you give me the beeping timer?
What's the regular one?
Right there, behind your computer.
Alright,
Ready?
I'm good.
I will make this very clear. The counter-advocacy is a counter-advocacy that says engaging the state institutions, infiltrating the state institutions is a good idea, and critiquing the state institutions are not enough. This is a reverse solvency deficit to the affirmative reason why they cannot solve for any of the practices that they have isolated in the 1AC because they do not engage the state. Now, I will make the link debate more clear. The affirmative is just a critique of the status quo United States federal government politics. You do not know what epistemic disobedience does. Epistemic disobedience is giving the middle finger to the state according to our single card from the 1AC. So it's a double line. Either you engage in the state, which is not epistemic disobedience, and you vote neg on presumption because they don't solve any of the case, or they are only a critique of the state and linked to all of our engagement offense. So extend our Woodson card from the 1AC. Not engaging the state is the same type of racial discrimination that was inherited in the 1930s, where people in Congress were like, oh, it would not do to have the black people find about their rights and not print constitutions in the classroom because then they will start engaging the state and start learning how to take down the state on the inside. This is the same like the type of logic that excludes these people from the state and says that they cannot control the halls of power and make better themselves. Now the Willens card was conceded in the 2AC. The Willens says we must infiltrate the state and that just by use cannot prematurely isolate themselves from the state and not engage the state, and just by saying it's bad we must engage the state, create tactics, plans, mental aptness to be able to take down the state in a layer institution, which the 1AC is not an idea of all. Now rejection of the post-colonial state is towards its postulate in 96. The post-colonial state, however, has grown to become more than a simple modern reckless state that gets help and they escape from arbitrary communication, establishing narrow rules, inclusion, exclusion, both scholastic interpretation, universally cannot be virtual attack and refers by the hatred and stealing, religious idea, big street, negation, scheme, no longer care to principle, universal object can be protection of the state must be linked to the project of creating an ethical and humane order, reconstruction of the state society, relation inside the state appears to be more fruitful than avenue the wishing away the state only to be swallowed by the Western total globalization is power institution, nowhere can be more heavily the post-colonial state, will go on to the line line by line. First, they say 1AC is analysis of the state. However, yes, it's a state analysis, but that doesn't mean that you infiltrate the state or you engage the state. Just saying the state is bad does not mean that you change why the state is bad, or how you say change the state is bad. Epistemic disobedience does not provide a method or a way to take down this neoliberal policies, which means that you defer and here. They say the ideological shift is best. Yes, the ideological shift has still happened within the United States institution. It doesn't have to be a policy shift where we say that the United States federal government should do this, but the people in the United States federal government should be engaged to have the ideological shift. They say singularity to say if you say a murderer should turn themselves in, it does not mean that you are complicit with the murder. In the same way, if we say the United States federal government should not be singular, it does not mean that we are engaged. We advocate for the United States federal government to be a singular entity. That means the counter-advocacy does not complicit with their singularity to say, and does not like. Also, if this is true, then their singularity bad. If a singularity is bad, and the United States federal government is inevitably going to be singularity, this just is another link to the engagement. That means the United States federal government is irredeemable and will always make singular policies, which means that they do not engage the state institutions. We say that is wrong. That we should be able to engage the state to make these non-singularity policies to be any say. It means that the state can do something. They say read this move card. The move card I already read the color of line in the cross section of one see that you must engage in hegemonic practice. This is another part for the one see because the epistemic disobedience does not engage in the hegemonic practice. Yes, they make a counter hegemonic discourse. However, that does not engage in the hegemonic practice, which Woodson and Williams Coach said must do. Now, debate has become a game in which we become spectators. We are not moved by the evidence that we read to take action. Words do not matter. We stand glacially unmoved and gross vacuous and verbal games. It's Kettle in 96 book essay speeches by white with the totalitarian speeches of a plea for reaffirmation basic human rights. They are associated with plot history for YouTube analogy, but intellectual show that the flow of events do not stop linguistic, pitiful, unequal to the history. Confusion of present new configuration example Jews because obviously new horse flesh on the screen prefix does not summon also virtue from the president that kills civilization, killing the field. Women do not stand. They rarely mean that we have to stand. We stand on cleanly unmoved and growth. Verbal vacuum, verbal gain. Our terror has begun formula guilty face to smooth of judgment. Not in itself a value. You can mark the card that they read this wrinkle card. It's not offense. Yes, you can have personal narratives. You can have organic intellectuals to validate your true scripts. However, we say that you should do that engaging the state. That doesn't mean we cannot read personal narratives such as Asian counter-advocacy in order to gain that state. They say read the Lindsay card. Lindsay is a critique of simulation. We do not say you have to have a simulation. However, you have to engage these states. Engaging the state is not a simulation because you are actually creating a counter-forward hegemonic state and taking it down through within itself. Now, we have affirmed the resolution without questioning the age of the resolution itself, failing to see totalitarian system as a convex mirror of all modern civilization, inferring using the resolution and engaging the state as best. Kettles in 96. The two basic political strategy was the intellectual unwittingly oscillating, inventing and deploying first weapons of mass destruction. The second, effectively makes it unjustified by preoccupying opposition system futile if you say what is the complex mirror of the modern civilization. Enemies, monument, impersonal power to will by technical activity, energy, dependent between total from destruction. Separate human and Brophy aid as a state of less terror to the enemy, the humanity taking responsibility, which are seeing ourselves.
724.
Yeah.
engagement, pedagogy, Black framework, and then the other thing. Hey, you want something?
Yeah.
Gotta get the screen time.
No, I just want to film myself.
It's going to be pretty hard for them to win any alternative when they concede an ego diss out of Robin Sanders says the stats going towards Latin America right now prioritizes profit over everything else, and neoliberalism is leading to extinction because we are on the precipice of ecological holocaust because of the collapse of agriculture, global warming, and these specific things. They do not have a reason why they just say the extinction analysis is bad, but do not have a warrant why specific scenarios are bad. This is a bad thing that is going to happen. It's going to kill a lot of people. It's going to kill the nature. The alternative doesn't solve it, which means is they just said to indicate they go for. We've 100% versus this since they have new experience pedagogy. Maybe your time isn't working. The 2EC spend a lot of time on this film versus our Medina and Sharpenango evidence which resolves all of our arguments on this film because it proves that we open up the counter histories. We have Latin American authors which you don't account for, like Alcoff and Medina. We don't claim to liberate all of Latin America. We're just opening your alternatives that you're calling for us to supplant old hegemonic practices with new hegemonic practices. That is messed up. We do not know what they want. We are just an opening. If they don't want us to engage with them, then we won't. We do what the Latin Americans want, but we don't say what they want. We don't claim to read their stories, but we still are a performance that we advocate epistemic disobedience, which you are misunderstanding. It's just a break from hegemonic practices and is questioning those hegemonic practices, which is critique, which is engagement. Now you're rereading a petition makes absolutely no sense. It's just a question of our individual responses to policies that are messed up in Latin America. This evidence just says that we have truncated pictures of the factors shaping the has for me any attempt of say engagement with that which is dissent to your black women. Now you're linking more to your ingenuine discourse arguments by going for framework every other time we have debated you. These arguments are ridiculous. What we say in debate doesn't necessarily determine how we act outside debate. We solve your immigration arguments better for things that we do outside debate, like the Kino border initiative that Brophy when we go to the Mexican border and help immigrants that have just become on the long track, which is the reason why we don't need to be that genuine about what we believe in debate. We can debate about other things and other grounds, but that is not a reason why we are not performance. Our 1EC is performance. Their conception of performance is too limited. Our engagement, our 1EC is a performance. Just because we go to Brophy doesn't mean we can't be passionate about what we debate about and question our privilege on the topic, especially when this topic calls for when we were talking about Latin America, when we were doing the research, I can't really realize that our policies for Latin America are pretty messed up, and we have to question those practices, which is exactly what our 1EC is doing, which is a performance. We know there are other forms of racism in Latin America. This argument makes no sense as there are gross differences. Now we don't engage racist parts of Cuba. This is a still argument. The Rodriguez argument is a mutually exclusive colonial representations filter our international engagement and filter how we enslave black and brown bodies in the United States. Black grammar. We solve engagement better or remove evidence is damning. You didn't spend enough time on it. You just read a one-liner from it. The 2EC process makes it pretty clear they don't understand our form of engagement. It is critiquing status quo forms of engagement, critiquing the state, which is a better form of engagement than just reading a plain text and then getting to your hegemony and your global warming impact faster. We know better how to engage the state. They do not. You should default act because they do not have an alternative form of engagement. What is it? Is it calling Obama? Is it throwing Molotov cocktails at Congress? We seriously do not know what we're supposed to do. There's no post-colonial state, which is the reason why there's evidence. It doesn't make any sense because status quo engagement in Latin America is colonial. Now ask yourself what the alternative is. If it's just reading a plain text and our DSA evidence is conclusive, that's a flawed methodology because it imposes the racist and empiricist nature of our activities to reject the vague interpretation of what we're supposed to do or what the link is. 1% risk of the app being engagement means this case a net benefit to the affirmative delegate. They say we don't get a permutation. Yes, we do because yes, we do. It's not an absolute. It's a test of mutual exclusivity. We're not endorsing it. We're just saying it's a reason why you can combine with our method. The permutation solves all the 2NC over by combining methodologies. If they're right about model minority, they model minority and all their theory about that, then the permutation solves that because it's able to combine our methodologies. We get a permutation since our 1EC discusses the thesis of the critique. That's our grocery government. That's very clear in the 2EC that they do not solve the but we solve the critique because we have a discussion of different forms of racism. Our Martinez evidence makes it very clear that the black, white binary is bad because it doesn't understand no other forms of racism, and this argument is fundamentally offensive because if there's racism towards Latin Americans, if they are not Asian, then we don't recognize that as racism. We think that hierarchies of violence are bad, that all racism is bad. We should reject all forms of racism, not have the Asian as a starting point. And they see we don't talk about personal experience. It doesn't mean we're not a performance. We don't assume to know how they work. That was on the other fields. Our compliment and MBA and everything. Hybridity solves as counting outskirts, evidence release and hand real says that collapsing down to a singular analysis of racism is bad, a combination of key because it is able to create coalitions of combating racism. That's county house consent is a mishandled intersectionality. It's a dis the alternative and a net benefit of permutation are worsened ever since when you collapse down to one root cause of all oppression in the world, i.e. Asian. You were doing what Hitler did, you were doing what Mao did, you were doing what Stalin did, where you isolate one thing that is a problem, and then anyone who doesn't agree with you, you have to exterminate them. That's fundamentally fun. Now, the immigration argument is silly. We solve it better because colonialism and racism determine our immigration policies, i.e. SB 1070, which we have researched a lot about and know about. Because of this, it was a racist policy towards anyone that is trying to immigrate to the U.S., which is necessarily determined by colonial representation. That's all of our big evidence. Gross legal evidence is the reason why intersectionality is specifically true in this, because Gross legal says that oppression in Latin America has been based on multiple things like sex, gender, race, class, which they don't solve because they only talk about one root cause of oppression. We say it's a multiplicity of things, which is why the permutation is able to resolve us. He spends a lot of time on why we don't get a permutation, but that's only why we don't get a permutation as an advocacy. We are saying it is combining our methodologies, and it's a test of mutual exclusivity, why you can vote affirmative to endorse their critique, to endorse their alternative. And Michael does not really spend a lot of time on the alternative in the 2C and the 2C. So if it does not solve case, then the eco dissent is 100% reason to vote affirmative.
9:49.
49.
I think that's.
Can you say?
Yeah, no. Yeah, no. Yeah, I know. Keep running.
Asian counter-advocacy, engagement, pedagogy. Dang. Are you ready? Okay. The role of the ballot is which team best performatively, methodologically deliberates particularly. We do this through our method of Asian counter-advocacy and the methodology of conscientization and our consistent performance. They lose it because their method of epistemic disobedience bad doesn't solve anything, and they link to it themselves with a bad performance. Now the Asian counter-advocacy proper, our counter-advocacy, our methodology of conscientization is a process of learning the world, a process specifically Asian American that uses experiences within academic and social spaces to learn how about these. This process of conscientization is an internal process that lets us be able to challenge white supremacy because they teach us how these things interact. We do this within this round because we are performance of breaking down the myth of the minority of Asian previously as traditional, saying that we're going to stop doing this and stop being used as a tool of oppression. The only reason why the myth of the minority happens because Asians believe that the tangible impact of this myth of the minority is the oppression of other groups, because Asians are the starting point for all the internationality claims. Asian Americans are used by the whites to oppress groups within the United States. People like Latinos are told, look at those Asians, why can't you be as good to them? This meritocracy thesis is what caused the oppression of these other groups, which is the reason why we saw that intersectionality colonialism claims better than they white say. Now the provided by and they don't get permutation. First is that the role of ballots could be methodology. You have to see I roll a ballot, which means that it is different because the white say I got a second argument. An independent voting instead of the permutation is body snatching, a commodification of our performance. They try to steal our narrative, which is a tactic of white supremacy. They try and subvert itself. Now the third argument is a theoretical argument because they don't define the plaintext. Means that permutations are permutation test out opportunity costs. When they don't defend that, you don't get things like mutual intentional and conventional competition because you are not traditional way. You don't get those things, which is the reason why it makes it impossible. And now the fourth dropped argument was that the myth of the minority never leads to light. It was examined both methodologies because they'll use them against one another. The hybridity arguments are dumb because hybridity is a tactical fire. The white use hybridity to try to lead the group and try to subvert the interests of other minorities. The reason why the delivery evidence says that hybridity was always rare. The white ignores the white focus on the black-white binary is that link because yes, the white was right when they say that the black-white binary wrong, but no, when they were wrong when they say that it's all about the Latina other. That focus solely on the Latina other links them to their own intersectionality arguments. No, only when those intersectionality arguments if they have the permutation. We have ones that they don't get that the first way. That focus on the black-white binary is bad. That was when you prove by the post-Blackness argument they are dropped on the white. All of the case arguments are net benefits to our disaster permutation and net benefits to our counter methodology because they are bad. Now the intersectionality arguments there's no link because the affirmative stands from our identity and the specific method, which is the reason why we break down traditional modes. This is a method that can be used by Asians, but can be reappropriated to use by other classes of races and sexes. This is not they did that to the alternative because we can conscientize for our own use. We cannot claim it for other sexual Latin Americans because we know that we is sexualizing. Also, their most inconsistency only critiques root cause claims. It's not about intersectionality. This links to the app more because they use that they can fit an umbrella of colonialism, all oppression. When they say things like neoliberalism, root cause of environmental destruction, they link themselves to their own criticism. Another performance, double term. There's too many of these. I don't even know why they are doing this right now. The engagement flow, the argument you don't solve their hybridity instead because we have takeouts to your performance and your methodology on the case, which is the reason why this environment this has complete bullshit and the reason why we have interlinked defense. Now the pedagogy flow, a couple of major blocked arguments. First is that the Siegel evidence is the performing. First is that they do not solve because they do not open up for other people. The ones who cross examination, they said we need to open up the space for other voices, other colonized people in America. Guess who doesn't do that? Brophy does. Which is the reason your authors are all from the American institution, which are your own Bertucci evidence says not enough. The weird is by our professor from the UJ. Alcove is a professor at Syracuse. Medina is a professor down the road at Vanderbilt. None of these are Latin American foreign policy people. A reason why they don't solve their own methodology. They say that epistemic disobedience are breaking away from hegemony. I will concede that argument because you don't break away from traditional notions of debate. This was a drop argument. There are no narratives, no music, no poetry, and they don't do anything outside of conventional debate. The Weinstein is speaking of cards without troubling the debate space. Also, the second link argument to this performing gotcha argument is the fluidity of their answers. What do they take a stance on? They don't take a stance on anything. Our own Stiegel card that talks about epistemic disobedience says that the only way epistemic disobedience can work is if they take a stand on something, give headline institutions the middle finger, something that Brophy does not do because they're trying to commodify their performance for a ballot, which in the way we do not link to the performance double turn argument because we went for framing before we switched our affirmative at Bronx and decided to do non-traditional modes of debate. They have constantly shifted while reading their affirmative to saying neoliberalism is bad, neoliberalism is good, add glamorous, which is a reason why they went to this performative double turn argument too. A reason why we did not link to this. We have not gone for a traditional framework argument since that we're at Georgetown because we realized that was a messed up form. Finally, you have dropped all the post-blackness arguments coming out of the one year. The post-blackness argument and then you use of the black-white binary because the black-white binary is messed up when it exists in the context of Latin America, but it's a little bit more than that. When you essentialize the Latino identity just as a single other that ignores the anti-blackness within Latin America, who do you engage with in Latin America? You probably only engage with elites because you paper over the discriminatory practices within Latin America. Our Alan Carter's and Cuban civil society is anti-black. They try spiking Ireland too by saying that they don't engage with those parts. Guess what? You need to engage with the black parts of Cuba, the black parts of Mexico. All of these are identities. When you don't take a fluid approach to this Latin America, that causes the racial scapegoating. It's the racism of this side to the opponent. All of these arguments are songs they take out to their phone. And the reason why you can vote for negative presumption, but it's all dissets and the reason why our performance is better because their YC is internally contradictory and the reason why they don't solve it. Which is the reason why they don't solve it. So they are too many dissets where you can vote affirmative.
God. 552.
Oh well. But don't speak into your picture.
Do you mind if I go to the bathroom?
I want to drink too.
Take the one and see, right?
Yeah.
pedagogy, engagement, the Asian counter-advocacy. Good. The 1AC was epistemic disobedience. We break with dominant narrative of U.S. engagement with Latin America was a tangible and effective resistance to colonial oppression that is pervasive in the region. The foreign policy community is deeply ingrained with these colonial conceptions, and debate is a microcosm of that privilege. The U.S. is viewed as the dominant actor. The policies are geared towards self-interest with a lack of concern for consequences on the inhabitants of the region. Only a break with its ideological violence can solve that. Our Migdalo and Alcock evidence. The 1AC's open air space or counter histories is crucial. Instead of assuming the dominant narrative of history and dominance, the 1AC advocates openness to and consideration of the subjugated knowledge of the press. That's the best form of subversion, which the alternative can't access. That Medina and Trovadenko whip has been dropped. They say we don't open up space because we don't read any of these advocacies. That was cleared up in cross-ex. I don't pretend to be someone who has been colonized because I acknowledge my privilege, which takes up their other parts. We don't claim to speak for them. The advocacy is an advocacy about openness, of listening to these perspectives, which is a reason why their performance arguments do not make any sense. They say they've reread Bertucci. It describes the status quo. It's a reason why the foreign policy community is deeply ingrained with these conceptions now and why a break from it is necessary. They say we don't have any Latin American authors. The rest of the Bertucci card is a reason why that is the case. There is no scholarship now because they don't have the funding. They don't have those institutions. The U.S. institutions never have employees from Latin America because they don't hire them. That is a reason why we should break from it and why we should endorse our strategy. They say fluidity and you should take a stand. That is an assertion. We definitely do take a stand because we are a stance against the form of epistemic structuring in the status quo. That's our move evidence, which they've conceded from the Black framework. You can cross-apply it, which is a reason why you can cross-apply it from that flow, which is a reason why we solve all of their take a stance arguments. Now their conception of performance is limited and naive. The 1AC was a performance of epistemic disobedience. Just because we didn't play music or read poetry doesn't mean we don't break debate, or if we were refusing to uphold the resolution as currently stated. That's the most foundational norm of debate, which is a reason why we meet their invisible threshold for a performance. Don't let them just assert we don't take into account our identities. We are policy debaters who are white and privileged, but that's not a reason to reject us. The 1AC was an acknowledgement of that and a critique of the way that most would engage the structures of knowledge and power debate. We're advocating that we check our privilege and our prevailing concept of the way the world works in favor of a strategy of openness and listening to others. That's Alcock, McNullo, and Medina. Ask yourself what it means to be subversive. They don't have a normative definition of it, and neither do we. There is no threshold for what a performance is. We definitely mean it, which is a reason why you can compare our methodologies, why we meet their role of the ballot. Now, they say they didn't go for framework again. There's no impact to ingenuine advocacy extended the twin hour, which means it's not a relevant consideration because it's only a question of performances in this round. They say post-blackness, it doesn't exist because the binary is used now. We dispel it. They say the post-colonial state that also does not exist drops in the 1AR. They say that we essentialize racism. We are not saying that anti-Latino and Latino racism is the only form of racism. We isolate it and we say the black-white paradigm is something that prevents it from being focused on. That is not the advocacy of the 1AC. Is not that is the only form of racism. It's a link of omission, which is the most terrible form. They say we need to engage blacks in Latin America. Yes, there was racism against black people in Latin America. We acknowledge that was done above. Now, the engagement flow. It's a question of mindsets and ideology. Absent an ideological shift, racial violence and extermination are inevitable. Only the advocacy is able to solve for that on a global level. The alternative and the counter-advocacy is specific to immigration in the U.S. and the Asian, the model minority in the U.S. It's a question of global solvency. We're the only ones who are doing impact calculus on this question, which means that there is an extinction level descent to their alternative, the critique. The permutation should frame your decision in this debate. The absent advocacy about racially motivated violence in Latin America. We criticize the harms of the black-white paradigm in race relations, attempt to explain with a more inclusive model. His analysis for why we don't get the permutation does not make any sense because we do meet their threshold for a performance. They say that we don't defend anything, so we don't get the permutation. That's not true. We defend a strategy of epistemic disobedience. That is the 1AC. It's a test of whether the methods are mutually exclusive, which is the reason why the permutation definitely still matters. It means the entire decay isn't competitive because we understand that the myth of the model minority is harmful and it should be dispelled. That's not a relevant response to the 1AC. This debate is a question of the best method for solving multiple forms of racism, and the permutation solves best. The impact is intersectionality. The Morrison and gross focal emphasis is not even answered in the 2-hour, which is the reason why you cannot vote on anything besides the permutation, because when you privilege certain forms of racism and certain forms of starting points, and you ignore the fact of a complexity of issues, gender and sexual differences, as well as class and economic considerations are all in play when it comes to colonial violence in Latin America. They are not able to solve for it. Just because he asserts that the counter-advocacy is a starting point does not mean they solve for the average needs that we have a disatt to their counter-advocacy. They say role balance performance method. We definitely mean it. They say you should use experiences. I don't have experience as a person because I'm white, but it doesn't mean that I can't listen to other people. It doesn't make me a bad person. It means that I am able to listen. They say root cause that is not explained well. It's not in the context of Latin America. The gross vocal evidence takes it that I don't have to reinvent the wheel here. It's a question of solving for global racism, which is a reason why you should never vote for the alternative because it's not a global consideration. The permutation is best. We definitely get it because it's a question of mutual exclusivity of performances. We meet their standard of performance, which means you should vote on the permutation.
Apparently that was boring to do.
What else is